Pleasure to be here, everyone, and CGI is proud to be a sponsor of today's event. It is my pleasure to introduce Richard Clarke. Richard has over a decade of experience as a data and analytics leader across the healthcare and financial services industries. He received his PhD from CMU and has been in the Pittsburgh area for about 17 years. He is currently the Vice President of Advanced Analytics and Reporting at Highmark Incorporated, a large integrated healthcare delivery and financing system based here in Pittsburgh. Richard leads a team of over 190 analytics professionals delivering data and insights to internal and external stakeholders. These include claims and clinical data integration activity for insight, getting data to the physician at the point of care to enhance the patient's care, optimizing the payment process across the system, and using data for a consistent level of care across the Highmark system. My pleasure again to introduce Richard.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? We good? Yeah? Awesome. So first off, I really appreciate being here. This is terrific. I think there's going to be a pretty consistent thread of discussion, at least through these first couple talks. That was kind of a wonderful tee up for a lot of what I do want to talk about. Before I jump in, just a couple of quick things. So one, yes, I'm a former McKinsey consultant, so that means three things. One, I'm super I love just-in-time delivery. I'm kind of bad at meeting deadlines. So Jen, thank you so much for the patience with my presentation. Two, it means you would think that I have pretty slides, but the dirty secret is most consulting firms have a lot of support for that. You get to the corporate world, that all goes away, so I had to make my own slides, and so they're terrible. But I hope the content is good. The good thing is I didn't do any PowerPoint animation, I don't think, so it won't be too bad. I think the third thing is I can't come up with good titles, so I just said big data at Highmark. But anyway, the second thing, ground rules. I'm super happy to talk about anything in the presentation, so just ask me. Last is I'm from Buffalo originally, so that means one, I know nothing about college sports, so don't ask me about that. Two, I'm perpetually grumpy about professional sports because all my teams are terrible and all Pittsburgh teams are great, and my friends tell me about that all of the time. And then the third thing is I'm very confused by people's reactions to snow. So if we want to talk to that, I'm also happy to. So just a couple of ground rules. All right. So with that, I want to do a couple things. First, I just want to tell you about Highmark. I'm super excited and super proud about the company. So I've been there about a year and 9 months. I think many would probably think of it as a Sleepy Blue, if you will. Big insurance company, large market share, kind of, doesn't have to do a whole heck of a lot. It couldn't be further from the truth. It's actually a super diversified, dynamic place. I'm 100% convinced that it's a Harvard Business Review article waiting to happen in terms of the transformation that we're undergoing. So just a couple of things about Highmark, right? It's the third largest integrated delivery and finance system in the nation. What that means is that we both have the funding arm, the insurance arm, and the delivery arm providers owned assets together, which means we can think very differently about how healthcare is delivered. We have 45,000 plus employees serving 40 million Americans across all the states with either our insurance products here or our provider delivery system here in Western Pennsylvania, our insurance products in Delaware, West Virginia, and PA, and then our dental and vision solutions that are nationwide, and then our Highmark Health Solutions technology company that also serves companies nationwide. And we really have 4 business units that work together to do this. And let me just talk quickly about those. So the diversified business, a very diversified company. Diversified businesses, again, have stop loss, HMIG, our dental and vision companies. We have the health plan, of course, which I'll talk about. We have Allegheny Health Network here in Western PA, 1,700 physicians, several hospitals. Hopefully everyone is aware of them. Amazing care. Just a wonderful place that we're investing a ton in from a capital perspective to make even better. And then finally, we have Highmark Health Solutions, which is our technology arm that we actually have other insurance companies on our platform. So that gives me a platform to sell analytics solutions and products out to a broader a broader set of companies. So one of our big strategies is innovate local, scale national. So very excited about that. A couple more things about the health plan, and then I'll actually get into the talk. So this is just my short movie for advertisement for Highmark. So we're the fourth largest Blue, one of the nation's 10 largest health insurance organizations. We have, from a health insurance perspective, we have 5 million active members across those 3 states I mentioned before. And I lead the health plan analytics team, which is about 200 folks doing a whole bunch of different things, some of which is advanced analytics and big data that I'll talk about. But I'll also, the reason why I mentioned that is that I have a whole lot of folks that don't do advanced analytics and big data, but also create a ton of value to the organization. So what I'm going to talk about as well is how we're trying to enable a lot of those folks to do their job better, faster, more streamlined through big data and advanced analytics. So, all right, with that, there's 3 things I really want. Hopefully you'll take away 3 things, right? One, yep, we got lots of data, but I think the important thing that I want to highlight there is not only do we have a lot of data, we're creating a lot of data every second, and that creates some challenges for us, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We do have lots of tools. In fact, I'm quite convinced there's not a tool that we don't have access to. The problem is effective deployment of those to turn data into insights, and I'll talk about how we're doing that, I hope. And then the most important thing to me is the last one, which is we have lots to teach, because we've got to ensure people actually use those insights. We were talking about that earlier before this, and we got a lot of work to do there. Kind of the literacy around like the state of the possible, literacy around the data, I think is a big deal for us, and we talk a lot about how we operationalize things, not only from a technical standpoint, frankly, more from a business process and workflow standpoint, and then the last one from an adoption standpoint. So whenever I talk to my team about any of this, change management is a huge deal for us, and how we think about change management, and we're not just kind of the technical team, we're actually the transformational team is the way kind of I think about it. So with that, let me start with the lots of data. So here's our data universe. There's a whole lot of it. Our Hadoop infrastructure, I'll talk about in a minute. It's about 700 terabytes that has a whole lot of stuff in it. Big amount of it is claims data. So we are a health plan. So that's the starting point, is that we have a ton of claims data. 10 years, 33 million kind of members over time, lots of claims data, but there's lots of other data that are coming online, right? So, we have a lot of clinical data coming in from our, not only our owned assets, but our provider partners. We have streaming data coming online. We're working very closely with Carnegie Mellon and the Disruptive Health Technology Institute to figure out how to work through some of the new sources of data. And then the other thing we're doing is we're actually creating a whole lot of data. So that's what I want to talk about for a minute here is what we're creating. And if we can get this will just play behind me while I talk to it. So,
once we confirm on our side that this is the
can
way
you
we need to go
turn
back.
off the volume? I made that video while I was on a conference call. Thank you. So I'm also good at multitasking. Awesome. So what you're seeing here is basically a robotic process automation bot that we've written that will go into EMRs, automate the extraction of that and delivery of that information back to us. So we have a number of bots that are kind of out in our world creating data for us. They're out there automating different processes, grabbing data, scraping, sending it back to us. And then we have a lot of natural language processing engines that kind of bolt onto that, which will then extract features out of that and plug it into our systems for downstream use. So this is awesome because it's exciting. We don't have to have people that do that anymore. The challenge with it is every day we have new data being injected into the system, and it really has put a huge strain on our data governance frameworks, because how do you deal with that, right? It's kind of happening all the time. It's in real time. We're doing feature engineering on all of this, and so I think the ability is out in front of the ability to do it is out in front of our ability to kind of figure out what to do with it. Just being totally transparent. So. We're working through that. If anyone has ideas, I would love to hear them, but I just want to be transparent about some of the cool things we can do, but are challenging our kind of traditional frameworks that we're working through. So that's one thing. Where is it going? Well, it's going to not 100 node, I don't know, but our little tiny Hadoop infrastructure, I guess 8 node, 2 edge nodes, 40 cores. If anyone cares, I am a business guy to the earlier question, so fail at some of the technical details. My job is to make sure we get value out of this thing. But about 100 users on this thing, kind of mucking around, and drawing insights out of that. But let me talk to the insights. So from a semantic layer perspective, I'll just use that term because it seems to be a good framework. So here's what we're doing. So we have all this data, sits in there. I have a whole lot of staff that has been coding in SAS forever. That's our kind of tool of choice for the most part. We have lots of other ones that we'll talk through. But so how am I going to get them access to that? Does everyone have to learn Spark all of a sudden? So how are we going to do that? So one of the things we've been working on is a way to basically create that semantic layer that we own. So my department in the business, the advanced analytics team, we kind of own that creation of the raw into the useful. The way it used to happen is on the left, which was everyone kind of wrote SQL code against everything. And everyone was doing 27 joins to get to something useful. I was always a little nervous that, you did 27, you did 26, and you did 28, and I wasn't really sure which was the right answer. So we've been working hard to not do that anymore through what we're what we're calling our Highmark Data API, which is basically a very easy way for all of our folks to connect, get the useful data out of the system. So I have a small data engineering team that basically, that's their job, is to build that. The way they build it is frankly by going around and finding what people are using most often and then porting it back into this kind of quote unquote semantic layer. And we build it in my shop because I can't wait. 2 weeks is actually pretty amazing for turnaround time. I would say more like 2 months, but I can't wait for that, right? So we need flexibility. We need the ability to make some decisions on this in real time, and I need to be able to reprioritize what the heck they're doing based on kind of my schedule, not on someone else's. So it's not a lot of people. It's literally 3 people. That's it. But you can do a lot with 3 pretty productive data engineers. So that feeds into kind of our downstream analytics systems. The thing that's really important here is that it's feeding into the analytics systems, right? So it's not feeding into any kind of operational processes necessary. It's really feeding into what we need to do from an analytics perspective. So what does that mean technically? Well, it means lots of cool things. One is that we don't have to do, we just did on average, what does like a piece of analytic at Highmark look like pre-post? Pre was, 10 data connections, about 12 hours of query time as it was getting everything together, duplicating data along the way multiple times, taking up terabytes of storage and having, 200,000 lines of SQL to get there. That was the old world. The new world is, well, we have one connection. It takes about, 20 seconds to run. It doesn't duplicate the data, takes up way less storage, and it's 35 lines of SQL, I think, or something. So a lot of operational improvements. This isn't the sexy stuff necessarily, but to me, this is the necessary stuff to allow us to then go and do the kind of the quote unquote sexy stuff. So that's one thing I'll just hammer home. This has been a really important foundational thing that we've been working on to make everyone's life easier. So what does that mean we can go and do? Well, now I will talk about some of the stuff that I find a little more business relevant. So one thing is to go do a whole bunch of predictive modeling, right? Because now we can kind of rapidly get after some of the data. So in broad strokes, here's like the evolution of at least one model. I just grabbed one example. So this would be a churn model, right? Very standard. I'm going to predict who's most likely to leave the health plan so that we can differentiate either our, marketing, our outreach, et cetera, to those members. Pretty straightforward, standard stuff. When we were kind of learning how to do this, very good models. It was helpful. I'm sure lots of folks have been doing, this kind of stuff. Logistic regression and SAS Enterprise Miner probably had, I don't know, if I have it up there, it might have been 6 or 7 variables drove it. Probably took hours to train the thing, right? That was cool. It worked. That was fine. Thankfully, you don't need to do real-time scoring on this kind of stuff for the most part because the underlying predictors don't really change all that frequently. So it was a good kind of first foray into this. So that was great. Making progress was kind of standing up as we're standing up some different infrastructure, we can move to R. We're able to start to leveraged kind of a wider set of open source libraries to do some of this, moved into like a simple random forest or something now. Predictive power goes up. That's great. It still took a while to train a model, but good news is that we were getting better models. And where we are now is now we're doing this off our Hadoop platform. H2O and Sparkly R is the way we're driving that. And now we have an ensemble model, right? So it's basically picking the best competition across a number of different things, either support vector machines or random forest or boosted or bag models, et cetera. And now we're kind of getting to a point where we feel really good about the predictive power of this, and it has hundreds of variables that are kind of in some way competing. So that's been a little bit of our evolution of the state of the possible. I'll talk a little bit in the last part about how we actually go and use some of this stuff, but this is just kind of the what we can do. So that's the evolution. Another example, just to give you another example, is high-cost claimants. It's a big deal for health plans, right? Who's gonna be a high-cost claimant? How can we get in front of that, either through care management or interfacing with the providers? This slide, I have two slides on this. This slide talks about the types of high-cost claimants. The upper left here are the ones we're never going to predict. So these are the really bad acute event. If I predict that one, I'll probably go into a different field. But we're not trying to predict that. What we're really trying to predict are some of the other patterns that are more the slow risers. Chronic conditions that kind of go bad, if you will, right? Things that are being mismanaged along the way that if we could intervene, we could bend that curve. And so first step here was to identify these different archetypes, but then the question is, can we predict it? So, if I took let's take the 32% of our high-cost claimants in the upper right, you can kind of see them going up. Like, how early can I figure out and differentiate between one person that's going to kind of go up and hit that threshold versus another person that's going to plateau out? That's basically the question. The answer is it's super hard to do that, not surprisingly. But the good news is when you can put kind of all the data to work, you can actually start to solve it. So we had failed at this a couple early tries, and I think the reason why we failed was twofold, right? One is that we had a hard time allowing a model to be trained on all of our members, just because there's so much data. So to unleash a model to be trained on 5 million members, we're having a hard time with. So we'd have to skinny it down and only train it on a subset, which always frustrated us because we're not taking advantage of our scale. We're acting like more of a regional health plan now instead of a big national one. And then the second is just the amount of features that we could give the model, particularly on some of the faster moving data like pharmacy, et cetera. We just didn't have the ability to kind of create the features and to feed it in. And so this had put on the shelf for a little while until we had some of the capabilities kind of up on the Hadoop platform. And now the great news is we can move past some of that and actually run true machine learning algorithms on this. Machine learning in two ways. One, to create features. We'll feed our pharmacy data into some algorithms to create a whole ton of features that come out of this. So, kind of interesting things like number of days on anti-nausea medication. Big deal for this kind of predictive modeling, et cetera. But you can imagine thousands of features being engineered, but then the ability to actually use those. And the cool thing about it is now we can do a whole bunch of stuff with this. So we've been playing around with, many different model types, again, some of the ones I mentioned before, a lot of nested neural nets as well, et cetera. We can test all of these in seconds because we have the platform, not in days. And by the way, before in days, it would often fail, for different reasons, spool space errors or whatever, which was super frustrating. We can do a lot of hyperparameter tuning. So really getting in and talking about, how many trees, kind of what depth of tree, you really start to optimize some of those. And the great thing, and run them all simultaneously. So we ran, 18 models in 2 hours. It was less than 7 minutes a model to see kind of let it compete. So this is kind of getting to the, just let the machine figure it out for you, right? We just have to structure the problem, and then we let the machine figure it out for us. The predictive power here is actually kind of, bordering on, I was surprised at how good it was. So we're kind of running, at an AUC of 0.9, with a true predictive recall of like 70%. And so that for us is good enough to start to take action, right? So the thing I would say on this is it is quite important to kind of tune the model to the intervention, right? Because your tolerance for false positives, say, is really dependent upon what you're going to do with it. So that's another conversation we have to have with the business a lot to make sure they understand what we're doing. So we can say, hey, if you're going to be taking a kind of aggressive high-cost intervention, we probably don't want to be wrong very often. So our tolerance for false positives is going to be much lower, but the percent of the total population we capture is also going to be lower. It's always a trade-off, right? So that's kind of to the education component of this. How do you teach people what a likelihood or probability model is so they kind of get it? So this is one we spent a lot of time with, how do we tailor where our cut points are for things to the intervention? So that just another example of things we can do now that we couldn't have done before without kind of some of the big data infrastructure. All right, I'm kind of going quick because I want to make sure there are questions. So hopefully that's okay. So last part, and from my point of view, the most important part, because this is let's turn all that stuff I was talking about into money. So we do have lots to teach because we have to make sure people use the insights. I'm going to steal a poorly, kind of a poor image slide here. I want to be clear that I did steal this from some of the articles that I wrote back when I was at McKinsey, talking about how to get value out of advanced analytics and big data. So these are kind of the 5 steps that I talked about then, and we still talk about all the time with my team. Steps 2 and 3 are super easy now. Creating the data ecosystem, doing the analytics, not so hard. We can do that. What's hard is don't forget step 1, which is what's the source of value of what you're doing. So let's start with, again, we were talking about this earlier. Before we launch anything, I'm always like, let's write a from-to business process. Here's a business process before we're doing this. What's it going to look like after? How's it going to change? And frankly, what's the financial benefit going to be? Or, patient benefit, whatever it is, but some type of value. And then really importantly are 4 and 5. We talked about how to operationalize. I do struggle with that word, so how to operationalize. Yeah, exactly. How to operationalize that. And that, to me, has 2 components. One is how do we integrate it into the workflow? We talk a lot about the technological component of that, but there's a business process. So for us, for those that are healthcare folks, how do you get into the EMR? So how do you get into Epic? How do you get into Cerner? How do you get into into Allscripts, et cetera? It's super tough. But then also, how do you get the business process wrapped around that so people actually use it? And then really importantly is don't forget 5, which is how do you get people to adopt it and actually use it? And that comes back to the teaching, right? So we spend a lot of time with our physicians, a lot of time with our clinical staff, kind of trying to work through how do you use these tools? Because ultimately, we're not doing just reporting, right? We're building analytical solutions, analytical products, if you will, and they're going to be used in day-to-day decision-making. We got to teach them how to do that. So the analytics team isn't just analytics folks, it's also business process folks, it's kind of instructional designers, it's change management, it's adult learning, it's got a lot of those other components to allow us to do 4 and 5 and actually get money out of the system. So a couple more things out as examples. So this is just a member hub that we've been working on. I only show this to allow me to tee up one of the integration points. So we have a member hub, it has about 33 million folks in it. This is where we'll drive a lot of our member insights that come out of some of our advanced analytics. So the example I'm going to give you is how do I help a call center rep? So I'm a call center rep. You call in for, let's say, open enrollment. I've segmented everyone into my population. I've done predictive modeling around your likelihood to buy what product. I've done predictive modeling around your estimated lifetime value, all sorts of cool stuff. Okay, that's great, but how do I actually get the call center rep to use it in terms of either a customized script for that segment or a customized pitch based on what product they're likely to buy, et cetera? How do I do that? Well, 2 steps. Step 1 is you actually got to drive it into the workflow. So this is a Salesforce screen. So this would kind of be what pops up when the person calls. They would click on the top here. My eyes aren't so good. I think it says product or information. That'll click down, and this is where a bunch of our analytics will actually be directly integrated into the Salesforce system. So it'll say, here's all the products they have, here's what segment they're in, and then that'll be tied to a specific, frankly, pitch that they give, and we're tracking, close rate. And the point would be, make close rate go up. And we got to train the call center rep to make sure they know when, here's how to react when they have this information, right? And so this is, the reason I raised this, one is this is the technology kind of integration I was talking about, but this is where the kind of worlds of analytics and IT definitely collide in a big way, right? Because the question is, well, who the heck does this integration, right? And how is it done in a way that is agile, because we're out there, trying to, play with it and kind of mess around with it as we're figuring out what works the best. And so we've ended up doing a lot of this. So, the analytics team starts to look more like a software development team, which again challenges a lot of kind of boundaries and norms. So that's one example. The nice thing about that is the quote would be, the call center reps, what they say to us is, "This is awesome, because I used to spend the first couple minutes of a call trying to figure out why you called. And now I kind of at least know why you called, probably, so I can get straight to the selling," right? Which is what I'd rather have them doing. The last point, and then I'll just make a few kind of closing comments and open it for questions. The last point is kind of to amplify what I just said, which is, we don't do standard report. I mean, we do standard reports, but those are all automated now. So we're not spending a lot of time doing those anymore. We used to, but not anymore. What we're doing is building solutions, right? We're building either tools to support a business decision, directly inform a workflow, et cetera. We have some pictures down here. We use Tableau a lot. I'm sure everyone else has their kind of visualization tool of choice, ClickView, Tableau, one of the open source. But the point is that we're doing a lot more of the bottom, a lot less of the top. And that means we, again, got to kind of teach people how to use it. We also got to know how to engage the user and how to use it. So it's a whole different, or engage the user in what they want. It's a whole different skill set, more of a consulting skill set, more of a, let's go out and wireframe out some dashboards, come back, et cetera. It's a newer skill for the analytics team, frankly. But it's very important because, again, what we're trying to do is not just report the news, but kind of inform how you're making decisions on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. So it's super important for us that we kind of broaden out that skill set. So a big discussion we have is around exactly that, kind of what are the skills and capabilities required as we kind of move into this new wave of analytics that the technology is enabling us to do, but now we got to actually turn it into, again, dollars for the enterprise. So a couple of kind of considerations I'll just leave you with. I think these are building on stuff that I've already highlighted. So one is that, for me, if I step back, this is challenging our operating model across IT, kind of the business and analytics. Like, what does that operating model look like? I'm convinced it can't be what it is today, where it is siloed and handoffs and change controls and rigid. I'm also not convinced that the answer is, that I'm going to have to build a whole IT shop within my department either. So I'm convinced it has to be something different than that, but I frankly don't know what that is. We're working on it, but I don't know for sure. But I think it's important, for sure important. The second is there's lots of implications for talent acquisition and retention. Everyone talks about how to acquire and retain a data scientist. Interesting. I'll be honest with you. Highmark's a big company, and I don't think we're ever going to have more than, I don't know, a dozen, maybe 20 true data scientists, right? So I get less worried about that. We'll figure that one out. I worry about all the other skill sets that I talked about, right? Business process engineering, change management, like all the consulting kind of toolkits you need to do what I just talked about, software development, all those kind of things. I worry greatly about how we're going to figure that out. Second is moving from R&D to production. I think we've talked about that a lot already. We're super good at creating shiny apps and creating pilots and getting kind of value out of a thing that we're intensely working on. We're not super great at then scaling that up to some enterprise grade thing, oftentimes because the handoff's messy. The handoff requires funding that we don't have. The handoff requires rewriting it in maybe a different set of tools that are kind of enterprise supported. So we struggle mightily with that. Again, full transparency. We talked about educating the business on data and educating analytics on the business. So I feel like I can control the latter more. So my favorite question to ask, I'll walk around my department, I always ask folks, like, when was the last time you went and sat next to the person that used your analytics and just watched? Just watched them. Watched what they did and said, oh, that's how you use that piece of analytic that I created. Or, wow, I could really help you with doing that if we deployed this solution. And from my point of view, there's never going to be a point in time when the answer is, I'm probably never going to say, well, that's too much. Go sit with them less. I hope I get there, but I know I'm not there today. So now, the first one I'm still working on, educating the business on data. So we have some internal training programs that I put in place around analytics academies and other things. We're working on it, but it's slow going. I'll be honest with you, it's slow going, and I'm still trying to figure out the way to accelerate that. And then finally, this is a tough one for me as well, kind of ensuring alignment between the technology architecture strategy and kind of the analytics strategy, if you will. In my view, those two can they can diverge at times. Part of it is, at least at Highmark, it's a little bit of just an organizational thing. Those kind of sit in different places, and we don't talk enough, so we got to talk more. But it's just a watch. It's a caution for everyone, especially with the speed at which the analytics team moves in terms of some of their thinking. Got to make sure that kind of wraps its way back to the technology architecture strategy and how we're actually getting ready to use some of these tools or enable some of the work that we're doing. So those are just kind of my 5 considerations. If I had to synthesize what I've been thinking about after kind of a year and a half or so at Highmark. So I think I left a pretty good chunk of time for questions. So hopefully we can have a good dialogue here, or you guys will just stare at me and say that's totally not relevant, and we can go on. So. Oh. But thank you.
Thank you. So
Do we have
questions and comments?
I'm getting there.
Just say who you are.
Hi, my name's Tom Foster. I'm a graduate student for data science, and I'm impressed with the amount of data that you guys work with, and I'm wondering how much of what you analyze is real time, say along the lines of fraud detection from the doctor and patient point of view, or patient analysis if they call in the call center and say I have XYZ symptoms and so forth, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other things you guys can do.
Yep. So the honest answer to that, how much we do in true real time, is like pretty much zippo. I mean, a very little bit, a few use cases. We do a bunch in kind of near time, if you will. So, getting close to real time. We do very little in true real time. And honestly, I think that's probably less to do with could we, from an analytics perspective. It's more to do with the interoperability challenge that we have kind of on the pushing insights back into systems. That's where we run into the biggest hurdle. I would say we're working really hard around that. We have three pillars that a lot of our strategy is built off of. So a member-centric view of the world. So kind of a more accurate way to say it would be a person-centric view of the world. So we're gonna have essentially a big flat file of everything we know about a human being available to everyone. The second is event-driven architecture. So how can we start to get to trigger-based information that is more in real time? And then third is a common care plan across our entire network. We're working on all those things, but frankly, until we can get to a bit of that common care plan that we can actually have a place where we can drive information, we're a little bit hamstrung in the amount of real-time analysis that would even be frankly helpful. The only place we do a little bit of it is in the call centers. But it's, for me personally, it is kind of, it is interesting, but it's not directly leading to kind of better patient outcomes necessarily. So I kind of put it not as high on my personal radar. So I'm very excited and passionate about doing this in a way that we can kind of impact the point of care, but the interoperability challenge is making that not feasible right now for us at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm Bob Zagaric with PNC. The question I have is, I saw on the one slide it said you had genomics data. Mm-hmm. I was wondering if you could speak to the nature of that and what you guys are doing with it.
Yeah. So we have a couple partnerships there where we're trying. the holy grail, I mean, not surprising, right? The holy grail would be how do you combine genomics with clinical with cost to figure out, like, particularly in oncology, like, what is the optimal treatment, especially for those for those patients that are kind of outside the standards of care, so outside of our care pathways. And so that's really what we're trying to do with it, is how do we inform decision making on the clinical side in terms of the optimal course of treatment for those that kind of sit outside of a care pathway or a standards of care. So that's what we want to do with it. We are, I think, kind of well, I shouldn't say far away, but relatively far away from getting there because it's hard, right? And it's really challenging. The good news is I think through some of our partnerships, I think we have good ways to start to combine some of the data, but that's very much in the data in search of a use case phase, I would say, right now. But it's primarily in the oncology space and trying to inform picking a course of treatment.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Obviously, also, I should say, very sensitive data that we're very careful with, and that's why it's kind of very prescribed use cases around that. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bob Berhacek with DataWorks Consultants. 2 questions. One is, how long has it taken you to build the environment up to where you are? When did it start? And who was your champion that really got you going?
Awesome questions. So it has been a probably 3-year journey to get where we are now. But I will say that the progress has been concentrated in the past 8 months, maybe year. And I'll tie that to your second question, which is the champion initially was there were a lot of folks in our technology group that were very forward-thinking and a champion of starting to stand some of this up, which was awesome. I'm super grateful that they were, and that got us so far. But then, frankly, I've been kind of the champion on the business side to say, okay, how do we actually turn this into gold, right? And I think that's helped us a little bit with the acceleration point. And I'll say the thing I found most important around this is that the ability to tell stories around it is super important. So I spent a lot of my time, telling stories to the executives around what we can do now that we couldn't do then to get excitement and kind of backing around this, which is why I think our kind of the slope of our progress curve has gone up a little bit, because it wasn't just a lot of the technical words that people didn't really internalize. It was more of the business-facing stories around, hey, here's a way that we're interacting with our members differently that we couldn't do before, and kind of give some of those tangible examples. So I think that's been super important and helpful. I think the next wave that's going to kind of really bring us onto the next S-curve of, at least for us, progress is when we get physician champions that are really jumping up and down saying, this is how I changed Mrs. Jones's, life based on some of this. We have some pockets of that, but I'm really, working hard with a number of our senior leaders at AHN on the clinical side to get that going, because then I think it's gonna really take off.
How do you handle PHI when you're looking at raw data?
Yep. We just let anyone access it anytime they want, no problem. It's not a big deal. Yeah. I figure it's going to go out there anyway. No. Oh, sorry, this would be videotaped, right? I probably should have joked around about that. Obviously, huge concern. I mean, the healthcare is awesome from a data perspective because it is so deep and diverse, and there's so much of it, but it's also incredibly challenging because it is so sensitive, and so the way we deal with it is a couple-fold, right? So we have a very structured security and governance process, and I think Lisa Martinelli and Omar and our privacy and security team have done an amazing job at kind of allowing us to still do what we do inside of a framework that is secure. So I give them a ton of credit for kind of setting up those processes to help us do that. The other thing is that what that does bring with it is there is quite a bit of time that we spend on who gets access, where is the data, how do we kind of lock it down. Everything we do is kind of on premises. There's nothing ever goes anywhere, so we can't, there are some things that in my old life that I was a little more used to when we were kind of on AWS or something. So we're not quite as nimble in some of those cases because we do everything kind of in a place that we can control it a little bit more, but it's for good reason. And then the final thing is there's lots of, we spend a lot of time kind of, I guess, at that raw data to semantic data layer to figure out, sensitive diagnoses. And, so we spend a lot of time on what needs to stay up in that raw data layer versus what can kind of move down into the semantic layer as well. So suffice it to say, there's a pretty big infrastructure that sits around that for us. It at times slows us down, but important to do so, and at times makes some of our vendor partnerships a little more complicated because there's a lot of information that never leaves kind of the safe zone, if you will.
So you have very limited access to the raw data?
Yeah. And limited access to the raw data, and in some cases, like hardly any access to the real raw data, if you will, right? So especially for sensitive diagnoses and things, it's just like unless you're the treating physician, you're just never going to see it.
Thanks.